Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about an axolotl care guide for beginners. So if you have just gotten your hands on an axolotl or you're thinking of getting one in the near future, then this is the perfect video for you. We'll cover everything from tank setup all the way down to feeding. So let's get started. Alright, so first things first, let's talk about housing your axolotl. So when it comes to housing your axolotl, there are two main options that you have. You can either go with a glass aquarium or a plastic tub. Now personally, I prefer to use plastic bins because they're a lot easier to move around, especially if you need to move your tank mates at some point. But if you do want to house your axolotl in a glass aquarium, then you can definitely still do that as long as it's made out of glass and not acrylic. The reason why we don't want to house them in acrylic aquariums is because acrylic can leach into the water and affect your axolotl's health. Now, depending on what size tank or bin you have, you may need to add something called a false bottom. What a false bottom is basically a layer between the substrate and the water that prevents your axolotl from accidentally ingesting the substrate. Axolotls by nature like to sift through rocks and sand while looking for food, so the false bottom prevents them from being able to eat the substrate. Now, if you do house your axolotl in a smaller tank, such as a 10-gallon or less, then I highly recommend adding a false bottom. But if you do have a larger tank like 20 gallons or more, then it's not as crucial but still recommended. And if you have any questions on how to actually make a false bottom, I will link a video below showing exactly how to do that. When it comes to the substrate itself, I personally like to use a mixture of play sand and gravel. I usually go for about 50-50 ratio, but it really doesn't matter as long as it's not small enough to be ingested by your axolotl. Now, if you want to add decorations to the tank, you can definitely do that. Just make sure that they are not sharp and that they are safe for your axolotl. Axolotls are very gentle creatures, so you don't need anything crazy. And if you do want to add plants, I would recommend doing only low light or no light plants, since you do not want to add a light to the tank. Light will cause algae growth and raise the temperature of the tank, which axolotls do not like. And also make sure that if you do add plants, they are not a type that will melt away and leave a bunch of debris in the tank. Now, the most important thing about any axolotl tank is that it needs to be kept at a constant temperature of around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. If the tank gets any warmer than this, then the axolotl's metabolism will speed up and their digestive system will begin to slow down, resulting in a loss of appetite and ultimately death. Now, if you live in a hot environment and it's difficult to keep the tank cool, then I would honestly recommend just returning the axolotl and getting something that is better suited for your environment. Another thing you do not want to do is add a heater to the tank. Even if you set it to 68 degrees, there's still a chance that it might fluctuate throughout the day, causing your axolotl to stress out. So even though it seems like a good idea to add a heater, it's honestly just not worth the risk. When it comes to filtration, you want to keep it simple and only have a sponge filter or a small air stone in the tank. You do not want to have anything too strong that will cause the axolotl to get sucked up into it. And it is important to note that axolotls do not do well in current, so you want to keep it nice and stagnant. The only time you should really be moving the water in the tank is when you do water changes. For water changes, you only want to do 25% water changes once every 4 weeks. Anything more than this will start to remove beneficial bacteria in the tank, which will cause stress to your axolotl. Now, I do know that some people recommend doing daily water changes, but I personally do not think that's necessary at all. Alright, so now that we have the tank all set up, we can move on to talking about water parameters. When it comes to water parameters, you want to keep it as close to tap water as possible. You do not want to add anything such as Seachem Prime or any other type of water conditioner to the tank, because that will add unnecessary chemicals into the water and stress out your axolotl. Axolotls are very sensitive to chlorine and chloramine, so that is why you see me adding AquaSafe to the tank. Now, if your tap water does not already have chloramine or chlorine in it, then you do not need to add AquaSafe. But I would honestly just test the water first before adding your axolotl to it to make sure that there is no chlorine or chloramine present. Also, when it comes to pH, you want to keep it between 7.0 and 7.5. Now, it is important to note that axolotls can tolerate a wide range of pH levels, but the closer you can get to neutral, the better. Alright. So now that we have the tank all set up and the water parameters perfect, we can move on to talking about feeding. As I said earlier, axolotls are scavengers by nature, so they pretty much will eat whatever you put in front of them. However, you do want to limit the amount that you feed them to prevent excess waste in the tank. I personally like to feed my axolotls 2 to 3 times a week and only feed them what they can consume in about 15 minutes. Any uneaten food should be removed from the tank because this will start to rot and pollute the water. Now, it is important to note that axolotls can fast for long periods of time, sometimes even up to a year, so it's not really that big of a deal if you miss a day here or there. And when it comes to the food itself, I personally like to feed mine a mixture of frozen and freeze-dried food. I like to give them a variety of foods just to make sure that they're getting all the nutrients they need. And I try to vary it up so they get bored. One of the best foods that you can give them is blackworms. They're very nutritious and high in protein. Another good option is bloodworms, but these should only be given as a treat because they are high in fat. And one last thing to note is that you should avoid feeding your axolotl anything that has been dyed, such as the Hikari Sake sinking wafers. They are safe for your axolotl, but the dye used to color them is toxic and can kill your axolotl. The last thing I wanted to cover was common problems that you might run into when keeping axolotls. So there are 3 main issues that axolotls commonly face. These are all preventable, so don't worry. The first issue is called columnaris. This is a bacterial infection that causes lesions or ulcers on the body of the axolotl. It can also cause them to have a loss of appetite and difficulty swimming. The second issue is called skin rot. This is a fungal infection that causes the skin of the axolotl to become discolored and start to slough off. It can also cause them to develop ulcers or lesions. And the third problem is called limb and tail rot. This is a bacterial infection that causes the limbs and tail of the axolotl to become discolored and start to slough off. Now, the good news is that all of these problems can be treated with antibiotics. So if you do notice any signs of disease, I would recommend treating the tank prophylactically, meaning treat the entire tank even if only one animal shows signs of disease. A good antibiotic to use is Canaplex. I like to use this because it's easy to dose and it treats both bacterial and fungal infections. So that wraps up my beginner axolotl care guide. I hope this video helped you out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to comment them down below. I'm always happy to help out the axolotl community. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I post content about once a month, so you don't want to miss any updates. Anyways, that's all for this video, and I'll see you guys next time.